Joining us now on Practical 365, it's Greg Taylor. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Hey, Steve. Hey, Paul. How you doing?
Hey, Greg. Good morning.
Not bad, not bad. How's things with you? Things have changed, I expect, over the last 12 months with moving to a new role.
Things have changed for all of us in many ways over the last few months. Yeah. So, I moved from a marketing role where I spent a couple of years as director of marketing for Exchange, and I'm back in a core engineering role now, focused on Exchange still. It's kind of all I think I know. Kind of core protocol stuff. So focused on kind of core Exchange protocols in a team for that.
So we've been thinking a lot about Basic Auth or Legacy Authentication to Exchange Online. Certainly with my customers, it's I've been hoping to just do Teams and stuff like that, but Exchange keeps rearing its beautiful head for various reasons over and over again. So there was an announcement last week about Basic Auth and some news around that. So do you want to let us know a little bit more about what people should know in particular about Basic Auth this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So Basic Auth, Legacy Auth, as we is commonly kind of interchangeably used, simply means using a straight username and password to get access to data. And we announced back in 2019 that we were going to stop allowing the use of just Basic Auth credentials against Exchange Online. Yeah. And the reason is quite simple, right? Is that it is the most predominant method people lose access to their data and have their data compromised. People reuse the same passwords over and over again. People choose incredibly simple passwords. There's no multi-factor auth, all of that good stuff. So we announced we were going to be turning it off. We did a delay initial before too long just because of the volume. We had a kind of interesting feedback from tons of customers that just felt they couldn't do it in time. Then we delayed again. We delayed again because of COVID. And we can talk about that some more, right? But in case you're not familiar with COVID or any of that kind of pandemic stuff. So what we announced last week, back to your point, really was that we're restarting the clock. 12 months from now, October 2022, we are going to start turning off Basic Auth for customers that are actively using it. We're already turning it off for customers that don't use it. And I think it'd be kind of interesting to get into there's some subtle nuances, but last week essentially was the re-announcement that 12 months from now, October 2022, Basic Auth and Exchange Online, we are going to start turning it off big time.
This wasn't really a new announcement in terms of you deciding to do something different. It was a resumption of something that had previously been planned and paused. It shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody.
Well, you're right. It shouldn't, right? I mean, we announced back in 2019 we were doing this. It's been a long road. But, I think what's challenging is there's a couple of aspects, right? One is, depending on the type of customer, we find there's a great deal of difference in how the message lands, right? Most enterprise customers, they have IT departments, they read the message center, they read the blogs, they listen to podcasts. They know it's coming. They have a lot of work to do, many of them, because they're larger organizations, so they probably have more apps, more users. But I'm less worried about them than small, medium business, because small, medium business that don't read message center posts and they don't read blogs. So it's a resumption of what we've done before, but the challenge is still making sure people know, right?
And there's something I've found quite hard sort of reconciling about all of this, because on one hand, I have been on calls with vendors of business apps, and to be fair, I said to one last week, I said, no, actually, this is quite positive because I don't often go on a call with some, an ISV, and they say, we're using the Graph API, we're using proper access accounts, we've been speaking to Microsoft about how best to do certain things. I said, that's rare. I can't remember the last time I went on a call like that, because over and over again, Office 365, they say, I've never heard of this before. And you think, are they just pulling every customer's leg? And often, again, their stock response has been year after year after year. Yes, it works fine with that. But what they mean is they're going to use legacy authentication. Just make an exception for it, for our application. It'll work just the same as it does at the moment. We've got a special update so it supports TLS. And you're like, oh, my. And you send them the developer documentation and it just goes into a black hole. So on one hand, there's that. And then on the other hand, what do people always say? Much like you're alluding to there, it's a critical application to that business, yet it's sending passwords in the clear text, SSL encrypted to Exchange Online. Sure. And realistically, sometimes breaking things makes people, if it's your most critical application that people want to nick credentials for, you've got an exception open to allow that app to come in.
Yeah.
It's a concern in itself. So there's mitigations I get, but it feels like it's that you need to turn the screws a little bit more. But
and I think one of the challenges as well, right, is these credentials. If credentials are stolen, then any resource that a secure that the user has access to can those credentials are valid against it. Whereas token-based auth, is restricted to the resource that you're accessing. So even if the token is lost, there is a single resource it can get access to with restricted permissions. I mean, there are so many advantages to doing it, but you're quite right that for many customers, there's kind of an understanding of what does this mean, right? Yeah. How does it impact me? And in the most cases from client apps, it's upgrade the client app or reconfigure the client app. That's not too hard.
Yeah.
ISVs, if they're dependent upon some third party who've integrated with Exchange Online in their mailboxes or their calendars, they need to go talk to the vendor and say, what's your plan? Now Basic Auth is going away.
Yeah.
Because, if they're not ready, if they don't have their application, if they're not aware of it, to your point as well, then there's some work they need to do, some testing and integration. It can take a while. And a lot of the customers I talk to, it's even in big household name customers, I get to talk to the kind of, customers that we all know the names of, right, often. And they are quite variable in their response to this. Some are all over it and have been for 3 years, right? And they'll be ready. In fact, they'll be turning it off or blocking it in their own tenants before we do. Some of them have got ridiculous numbers of apps and they don't own them all, right? I mean, these aren't apps they built in house, so they have to go around their vendors and push their vendors. So what are you doing about this and what are you doing about that, and manage that process? So it's tough.
It is frustrating because, as you say, the customer might be a well-known. You might, listening here, be working for a well-known business that everybody knows the name of, but you're reliant on this 20-person company who develop an application, and they're telling you that this is news to them, but actually this is a critical part of how you communicate with your customers. And what do? You have to pay them, and they're a product development team, and they might have, as we were saying earlier, about features in Teams and things like that, a backlog of things that they'll want to do. But it just feels like this has been waiting a long time.
There's a broad issue too, just around supply chain security. If you have applications like that are dependent on some component that you get from somewhere else, we've seen that emerge as a huge issue with our customers. It's kind of orthogonal to the Basic Auth issue, just in general. Any enterprise is going to be going through that right now, and now is probably it's probably the least bad possible time to be dealing with having to retrofit your components that might use Basic Auth, given how much attention and scrutiny is going into the component supply chain right now.
Yeah, one of the most common questions I get, obviously, is how do I know, right? How do I know if I'm using Basic Auth?
Yeah.
Right? So pretty obvious, first step question. So the Azure AD sign-in logs is typically where we point people and say, right, there's those sign-in logs are going to give you an idea. Now, for many customers, they work great. For bigger customers, they need to combine it with things like the Azure runbooks and workbook and figure out because the amount of data is pretty vast, and so dealing with vast amounts of data makes it really hard. But the Azure AD sign-in logs will tell you stuff that I can't see, right? Which will be usernames, IP addresses, and everything else. I can see things at an aggregate level. And so one of the things we're actually going to be doing and starting fairly soon is sending per tenant message center summary posts.
Yeah.
Right. To say, you've got in the last 30 days, 250 IMAP users and, so-and-so Outlook users, and send those to tenant admins to give you an idea of kind of here's where my usage is. And then you can use the Azure AD sign-in logs and go in and drill down a bit and say, look, who's using IMAP? There's a lot of IMAP, by the way, right? It's still going on. Surprising. The surprising one for me, the most surprising, is remote PowerShell. Given we have PowerShell v2, right, modern North, the amount of people still using Basic Auth PowerShell is pretty startling. So we need to get on that too. So I'm hoping that the message center posts will be read. People will then use that to go and drill in a bit more. But, unless you know how big a problem you've got, it's a little hard to know how much work it's going to take to, remediate.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's a selective way of doing it in a way. If you're small enough to be able to look at those sign-in logs, or you've got the log analytics in place to be able to have a look through these, then what I found is that you may find that there's some broad brush strokes that you can do quite quickly if you're looking for particular protocols. You've moved to the Outlook app quite wisely, I would say, or you've got perhaps some legacy clients. I've come across precious few that were able to move across from Exchange to Exchange Online because they used the UPN for sign-in and flipped over to the other side. Many had to re-sign in. Those kind of clients, once you've dealt with that, it's had elephant analogy is always great in the Exchange world, but how do you eat an elephant? It's bit by bit, and you might find that you can cross off a lot of these quite quickly and lock down everything but perhaps those core applications like IMAP. And as a smaller organization, those client access policies that you can put in place to limit access to Basic Auth, then you can do those inside the 365 portal now. And that creates a default policy, and you can just flip those protocols off and then drill down from there. I
mean, in what I'm seeing, the most, the quickest wins, right, will be active sync devices.
Yeah.
So iPhones and Google or Android apps and everything. So the iOS, as an example, the iOS native mail app supports OAuth, absolutely.
Yeah.
However, it only added support for OAuth in a build. I do have a build number off the top of my head, but I can't remember what it is. Don't want to quote a number and be wrong. But there are many. But what happened was before it supported OAuth, it was only Basic Auth. So people would add the account, their mail account, to their iOS device, and it would be using Basic. Thing is, now we all have super smooth upgrades. When you go and buy your new iPhone, it transfers all your settings across, which includes the authentication setting.
Yeah.
And so it still will use. You might be on the newest iPhone 13, still using Basic Auth. Now, I'll say, and I don't think we've said this publicly, but I'll say it for you, which is we're working with Apple and Google to actually work on plan to auto migrate. However, the quickest and easiest solution everyone can do today, which is to remove the account, the email account, and add it back to your phone, and it will trigger the OAuth flow.
Yeah.
And then you're done, right? It's great. But we are working with them to auto-magically migrate a number of devices, and that's quite a big number of devices.
That would be good. There's a flip side to that, though, of course, because when I had a conversation with a customer last week, and we talked about that exact thing. So, well, if you've got to do that because you've got to secure things, you've got to put MFA in place. That's an ideal opportunity to, one, manage the device using Intune instead of you've got the licenses, and move to the Outlook app as well at the same time. So but. No, of course, it would save countless hours or countless pain from different users if you could switch it on and it just reprompted and put you through that flow. That'd be brilliant if that does transpire.
Yeah, I mean, the Outlook app is clearly the other easy option, right? And where I work, so I'm going to say that's great. But I'm also a realist and know many of our customers love the native mail app on their iPhone, and that's fine, which is why we're working with Apple to help customers migrate it. But they can do it themselves. As we turn off Basic Auth for people that are using it, because right now, just going back to something I said earlier, is whilst October 2022 is when we start turning off protocols for customers that are using Basic Auth, we are already turning off Basic Auth for the customers that don't use it, because many of our customers, and I'm talking millions, don't use Basic Auth, but do not have security defaults enabled. Some of them may well have conditional access policies or something in place, right? But not many. So what we're doing is we're turning them off now. I think I saw, Tony got the message sender post, Siggy got the message sender post, a bunch of people we know, right, who got the message in their tenant, which says, because what we're doing right now is we're tracking usage, auth usage at aggregate levels. I can tell if a tenant uses Basic Auth or not, over which protocols and how often. And what I'm doing, because I can't start affecting people, I don't want to start affecting people who use it just yet, is we're turning off Basic and blocking it for customers that don't. And those customers should be using security defaults, right, as well. And then we move on to turning off individual protocols within customers that are using it. So we're trying to sort of get ahead of this a bit and proactively disable Basic. But customers, there's a variety of things they can do too. So as I said, iOS devices, that kind of stuff, making sure they're using new versions of Outlook. We're making sure when we block Basic Auth for Outlook that if Modern Auth has not been enabled for that tenant, we're doing that too. Right? Because that wasn't the default as well for a number of years before a certain time point,
Of course,
so we're doing a bunch of stuff.
I think it's good that it's a bit more proactive in a way, and it's thinking through that, and not just giving a date and then going bang, because
we want to proactively stop customers being compromised, right? Because if you're not even using Basic and you don't know it's still enabled, you are one hack away from being compromised. So we want to proactively stop that happening. Customers can still turn it back on, right, if they need it for now, but and as a percentage of those that we've turned off, it is fractions of, it's 0.06% of customers that we have proactively disabled have actually gone and turned something back on again.
Because I guess the majority of those are small, medium businesses who don't have IT and have just been bought it with the expectation that Microsoft will probably keep them safe.
And we want to, right? And now we do that with security defaults, right, which is turned on with every new tenant, but we didn't do that from the very beginning. And not many customers go and proactively turn on security defaults because they don't quite know what's going to happen when they do, right? So, we're sort of working in conjunction with that team, because once we've turned off Basic Auth, I'd love to have them go and turn security defaults on, right? But you have this kind of added complication of things like MFA enrollment and stuff like that. So we need to help customers understand the impact of that as well.
So there's a long road to this, but Office 365 as a service itself is 10 years, more than 10 years old now, and it's stuff from the first days of it that have been cleaned up as you go along, I suppose, because security defaults has been around for nearly 2 years or so now, as well, for new tenants. So
no, it has, this whole Basic Auth thing, it's been around since the beginning of IT time, right? Simple username and password, and it's done a sterling job, right? It has, we have all relied upon that for many things for many years, but there are just better options available now, and it doesn't mean that, does it mean I can't use a username and password? No, you can absolutely still use a username and password, right? But you trade them for a token rather than store them on the device or store them in an application. And it just, whilst you should also have multi-factor auth, right? But let's just say you don't, right? I mean, just not storing your creds on the device or in an app is a huge step forward from where we are today. So we just we want to try and help push people forward and get with the program, newer technology.
Well, thank you for joining us on the show today, Greg. It's always a pleasure, and
Thank you, Greg.
especially so to talk about something that's on so many people's minds. At the moment, the whole security, password, credential theft, and it's good to hear positive things really that Microsoft are doing in the Exchange space to go above and beyond really to try and make things better. So thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Great to talk to you both.